I had seen both of them at the same time. So
Same day?
I was actually seeing both of them at the same time.
That the defendant's 3-year-old daughter, Zoe, is your child. Told you that you were her father, but now she's changed her story. Claimed to be certain that Mr. Campbell is not Zoe's biological father.
She deserves to know who her real father is, and she keeps flip-flopping, saying one day that I am, one day that I'm not the father. And being the father of Zoe, it's given me a reason to continue on the right path.
Miss Hopper told you that you were the father.
Yes.
So, Miss Hopper?
I only told him there was a possibility.
After she had the baby, when the baby was about 6 months old, that's when she told me, because I FaceTime her on Facebook, and she has Zoe call me daddy.
Thought maybe it was both of them. The day that they say she was conceived, same day. Not the same time, same day.
She had also slept with the ex on the same day she slept with you?
No.
Okay, so...
In this case, the atmosphere in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom is heavy long before the results are even mentioned. Everyone present understands that this is not simply about biology. It is about identity, responsibility, betrayal, and the deeper relationship between law and justice. The people involved have walked into the courtroom with their own narratives, their personal explanations, and their individual fears. But Judge Lauren Lake is here to bring structure, accountability, and clarity to a situation that has spiraled far beyond private control. The courtroom is filled with the emotional tension typical of cases where the truth must be confirmed scientifically. The individuals involved are not only dealing with private heartbreak, but also with the legal consequences that come with questions of paternity. As Judge Lauren Lake listens, she organizes their stories like evidence being placed carefully onto the stage in a divorce case, where every fact can change the trajectory of a family. This mirrors themes often explored in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where uncomfortable realities become turning points, and where facing truth is the only way forward. At the center of this description is a mother, a presumed father, and a child whose future stability depends on clarity. The mother appears with a mixture of confidence and hesitation, torn between what she believes is true and what she hopes might be true. The alleged father appears with determination and vulnerability, a man who wants to be responsible, who wants to know the truth, and who wants to build his life with honesty rather than illusion. Both sides have brought witnesses, each of whom carries memories, screenshots, conversations, and impressions that complicate or reinforce their side of the story. Judge Lauren Lake, experienced in reading human contradictions, listens to every word. She asks sharp questions, not to punish but to uncover the layers beneath emotional storytelling. She recognizes the familiar patterns of uncertainty, patterns often heard in DNA test cheating stories, where relationships collapse under secrets discovered too late, where people regret the timing of truth, and where families learn that biology is only the beginning of responsibility. The mother explains her timeline, her relationships, her shifting feelings, and her worries. She acknowledges that mistakes were made, but she also insists that she never intended to mislead anyone. She tries to explain how the child resembles one man, then another, and how her impressions changed over time. Her story reflects the complex reality of human relationships, the same complexity often discussed in legal conversations on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where personal emotion collides with legal responsibility. The alleged father, on the other hand, speaks from a place of emotional investment. He describes how the child gave him motivation, how the possibility of fatherhood placed him on a better path. Very similar to the personal reflections heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals describe the turning points that helped them recenter their lives. He admits mistakes, such as refusing earlier DNA testing, but he also explains the circumstances behind those decisions. The fear of losing an emotional attachment, the fear of discovering painful truth, and the fear of being misled, again, all play a role in his hesitation. Judge Lauren Lake listens carefully but firmly. She brings their conflicting narratives into the framework of jurisprudence, where the concept of justice requires that evidence outweigh assumptions. Her role is not to judge their character, but to provide clarity for the child and stability for the future. In doing so, she acknowledges something vital. The law is not only about rules. It is about fairness, transparency, and the resolution of uncertainty. Observers can sense how deeply everyone is invested. Even the witnesses, mothers, siblings, past partners, feel the emotional weight of the moment. They present messages, social media conversations, memories of holiday communication, evidence of emotional inconsistency, and testimonies that reveal patterns of behavior. These accounts resemble chapters from adoption stories, full episodes, where families search for truth, identity, and belonging through years of confusion. Judge Lauren Lake does not allow the chaos of conflicting stories to overshadow the purpose of the court. She reminds everyone that the adverse inference principle in the Evidence Act teaches a simple lesson. Withholding truth or refusing transparency can draw negative assumptions. But today, she emphasizes, there is no need for inference. There is a DNA test, and there is objective science. While the case unfolds, discussions arise about birthday gifts, custody, disputes, online arguments, blocked messages, and family interpretations of resemblance. These conversations resemble segments from the Divorce Course podcast, where emotional disagreements become legal disputes, and where the court must determine what is fact and what is simply frustration. Judge Lauren Lake examines the timeline of relationships, the sequence of intimacy, and the inconsistencies in communication. She confronts contradictions gently but firmly, pushing each person to acknowledge what truly happened rather than what they wish had happened. Her grounding presence ensures that every detail contributes to the final understanding. In this courtroom, truth is not an enemy, but a cleansing force. It restores direction to families who have been lost in uncertainty. It establishes accountability for parents who must now decide how they will show up in a child's life. And it reflects the larger legal journey toward fairness. A journey that mirrors the structure seen in Supreme Court child support rulings, where a child's well-being always outweighs adult dysfunction. As the DNA results draw closer, the room grows quieter. The mother holds her breath. The alleged father stares ahead with the weight of hope and fear combined. And the witnesses brace themselves for an answer that may redefine relationships overnight. Judge Lauren Lake speaks calmly, aware of the emotional storm resting on her next words. She explains that the DNA test does not judge past mistakes. It simply identifies biological truth. And for families torn between emotional attachment, personal regret, and legal responsibility, that biological truth becomes the foundation on which the future must now be built. When she opens the envelope, everything pauses. Emotions, breathing, expectations. Every story told throughout this hearing now leads to this moment. And from this point, their lives will not return to whatever they were before. The truth, once spoken, reshapes the path ahead. The moment after Judge Lauren Lake reveals the DNA result is not explosive. It is suspended, quiet, and heavy with realization. The courtroom breathes differently now. This truth, which everyone has been circling around through emotion, accusation, and uncertainty finally stands on its own. In cases like this, the simplicity of biological fact can feel both merciful and devastating. It confirms what someone hoped for, and simultaneously dismantles the reality someone else built in their mind. And that is the power of verified truth. It is final. It does not negotiate with opinion. It does not bend to emotion. And in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, such truth becomes the foundation on which justice must be structured, even after the DNA result is spoken. The deeper story continues unfolding in the expressions, the reactions, and the sudden reordering of relationships. The mother absorbs the result first, feeling both relief and disappointment. She had spent months convinced that resemblance meant certainty. She believed that emotional consistency from one man was enough to establish paternity. Yet now the truth forces her to acknowledge the complexity of her own choices. Choices shaped by confusion, emotional instability, and the fear of raising a child alone. The alleged father sits in a mixture of heartbreak and clarity. The DNA test has denied him the identity he had been preparing for, an identity he had begun to embrace as part of his personal healing journey. His reaction echoes the emotional testimonies heard in Celebrate Recovery stories, where people describe being reshaped by moments that hurt but ultimately redirect their lives for the better. Judge Lauren Lake notices these layers and responds with empathy. She does not rush past the emotional fallout. She allows space for everyone to breathe through it. Yet even as the court processes the result, Judge Lauren Lake continues to instruct, clarify, and explain. She reminds them that the legal system is not here to punish human imperfection, but to provide structure where personal relationships have become chaotic. Her words echo many themes discussed in the relationship between law and justice segments from legal commentary platforms. The idea that justice is not a perfect moral calculation, but a procedural safeguard that protects the vulnerable. She explains that now the biological truth is established, new responsibilities arise. If the biological father is absent or unreliable, the mother will need to consider legal avenues, possibly even Supreme Court child support guidelines, to ensure that the child receives appropriate care. If the alleged father still wants to remain in the child's life, it must now be through emotional choice, not legal obligation. The difference between those two paths shapes the future in profound ways. The mother's face softens as she hears this. She realizes that emotional hope can no longer define direction. Only truth can. She may have felt comfort imagining the alleged father as the stable figure in her child's future, but now she must confront the reality that biology cannot be rewritten. But she also hears what Judge Lauren Lake often emphasizes. Fatherhood is not limited to biology. Care, presence, and love can be chosen, but they cannot be enforced where biology disagrees. The alleged father listens closely. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges his dedication, his desire to do the right thing, and his effort to rebuild his life with positive influence. She reminds him that truth should never diminish the good parts of him. If he chooses to remain in the child's life through emotional support, mentorship, or presence, that choice is valid and meaningful, but it must be grounded in transparency, not assumption. The court now shifts to addressing the behaviors that led them here, weaving in patterns recognized across family law cases. Judge Lauren Lake examines the timeline of communication, the inconsistent statements, and the emotional fluctuations that led to confusion. She identifies how these behaviors mirror issues frequently discussed in the Divorce Course podcast. where unclear communication, reactive decisions, and unresolved personal wounds often escalate into complicated legal disputes. She discusses the importance of honesty in intimate relationships, especially when children are involved. Many problems that appear in paternity court begin long before conception. They begin with mismatched expectations, unresolved emotional trauma, and unspoken truths. These patterns are reflected in countless DNA test cheating stories, where secrecy becomes the root of future conflict. In this case, the shifting statements about who the father might be created, instability not only for the adults, but for the child's future. Judge Lauren Lake highlights the need for both accountability and compassion. She explains that while mistakes were made, the court's purpose is not to shame, but to clarify at this moment. She introduces a legal principle, the adverse inference in the evidence act. She explains that when someone withholds information or gives inconsistent testimony, the court may draw negative assumptions because truth should never be selectively shared. Though this case now has a scientific answer, the lesson remains relevant for the future, especially if custody, support, or further legal issues emerge. The mother listens with quiet sincerity. It becomes clear that she had drifted between emotional instinct and fear-driven decisions. She now understands that honesty, no matter how difficult, would have spared all involved months of pain and doubt. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom becomes not only a place of resolution, but a place of learning. The same type of environment explored in legal education podcasts like the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where emotional intelligence and legal structure meet. From here, the judge turns toward the larger implications. She explains that this case represents a broader conversation about the concept of justice in jurisprudence, the idea that justice must balance truth, responsibility, and compassion. It is not simply about determining biological parenthood. It is about guiding families toward emotional and legal stability. The witnesses in the courtroom also react. Mothers who hoped their sons would be fathers, siblings who believed they knew the truth, and family members who interpreted resemblance as certainty. They now confront the reality that assumptions, no matter how believable, cannot replace scientific verification. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that such cases are not about winning or losing. They are about restoring clarity where emotional conflict has caused distortion. She compares this process to the narratives heard in adoption stories' full episodes, where children search for their roots not for drama but for identity. Similarly, paternity cases are about providing a child with a truthful foundation. The alleged father wipes his face quietly, processing the emotional shift. The mother, seeing his pain, expresses a different kind of sadness, not just for him, but for the lost potential of a family she once imagined. Their shared grief, though different in nature, brings them to a moment of mutual understanding. Judge Lauren Lake encourages them to look beyond disappointment. She reminds them that truth, even when painful, lifts the burden of doubt. The mother must now determine whether to contact the biological father, even if he has been unreliable or absent. The alleged father must now decide how he will redirect the emotional commitment he once envisioned for this child. The judge emphasizes something profound. The truth always demands new decisions. It does not simply close a door. It forces people to choose which door to open next. And that choice must be made with clarity, integrity, and maturity. She also points out that cases like these, when resolved responsibly, become examples for others who listen to family-based podcasts or legal commentary platforms, like the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where people learn how confronting truth can break generational patterns of misinformation and emotional instability. Through every word Judge Lauren Lake speaks, she reinforces a larger message. Parenting is too significant to be built on assumptions. The child's well-being must always outweigh adult arguments, emotional volatility, or impulsive reactions. The law exists to protect the child first, and today, that protection begins with acknowledging biological reality. The courtroom begins to settle. The tension dissolves into quiet reflection. The legal clarity has been achieved, but the emotional journey continues. Judge Lauren Lake closes this segment of the case by reminding them that healing requires accountability, humility, and truth, and that the truth discovered today will become the starting point for whatever future they choose to build next. As the courtroom begins transitioning from the intensity of the DNA results toward the closing reflections, Judge Lauren Lake remains steady and composed. Her role in these final moments is just as crucial as during the heated arguments and the emotional testimonies. She understands that once biological truth has been revealed, the psychological and legal transitions must be guided with care. The truth alone is powerful, but without direction, it can also destabilize the lives of the people involved. With the results now known, the individuals in the courtroom must confront a different question, not who is the biological father, but what will each person do with the truth now that it can no longer be denied or altered. This is where justice becomes more than a legal answer. It becomes a pathway, and in this way, Judge Lauren Lake demonstrates the profound relationship between law and justice, reminding everyone present that the law provides answers, while justice provides direction. For the mother, this moment becomes a turning point. She must reflect on every decision that led her here, the choices during turbulent moments, the uncertainty she carried silently, and the inconsistent messages she gave the alleged father. She listens as Judge Lauren Lake gently but firmly explains the responsibility of transparency and the need for consistent communication, not only for the legal process, but for emotional health. These reflections resemble discussions often found in the Divorce Course podcast, where the emotional confusion of relationships becomes a legal puzzle that must be solved piece by piece. The judge reminds her that moving forward requires honesty, especially with herself. She must now consider reaching out to the biological father, even if that man has been distant, unresponsive, or inconsistent. Whether he is ready to step into the role or not, the child has a right to truth, and the mother has a duty to pursue that truth with maturity. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that many families have found healing through accountability, similar to the stories featured in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledging past actions becomes the first step in rebuilding a healthier future. For the alleged father, the man who believed he could be the child's parent, the moment feels heavier. Judge Lauren Lake sees the shift in his expression, the quiet disappointment, the lingering confusion, and the emotional letdown of realizing that the identity he hoped for must now change. She acknowledges his heart, his sincerity, and his desire to be stable, responsible, and present. His journey mirrors themes often discussed in Truth Changes Everything podcast, where facing the truth becomes a moment of character refinement rather than defeat. Judge Lauren Lake validates his emotional attachment. She tells him that caring deeply for a child does not disappear because a DNA test changes biological reality. Many people, step-parents, relatives, mentors, have built powerful, lifelong relationships with children they did not biologically create. If his emotional connection remains, he can choose to stay involved in a healthy, defined, and respectful way. But it must be grounded not in assumed obligation, but in voluntary love. She reminds him that people often regret taking DNA tests, not because the truth is wrong, but because the truth exposes the vulnerabilities they tried to avoid. But she also teaches that avoiding truth only prolongs pain. His courage to finally take the test shows maturity, the same maturity needed for whatever decisions he makes next. Judge Lauren Lake turns her attention toward the broader legal implications. She explains that once biological paternity is determined, the next steps, such as financial responsibility, visitation, or custody, must be grounded in state law. If the biological father is located, rules similar to Supreme Court child support standards may come into play, ensuring the child receives proper care. The alleged father, however, cannot be held financially responsible, nor can he be included in any legal documentation unless he formally chooses adoption or guardianship in the future. This distinction, she notes, is essential in maintaining fairness. In explaining this, she refers to the concept of justice in jurisprudence, the idea that justice must not only provide answers, but uphold rights. Forcing a man who is not biologically connected to pay child support or assume legal duties would violate the integrity of the system. At the same time, the biological father's responsibilities cannot be replaced by preference or convenience. The legal system must act impartially, even when emotions are involved. At this moment, Judge Lauren Lake also educates the courtroom about how the adverse inference in the Evidence Act functions in family law. She explains that when evidence is withheld, or when stories change repeatedly, the court may draw negative assumptions about credibility. And while the DNA test in this case resolved the biological question conclusively, the principle remains important for future legal matters, especially if disputes arise regarding custody, support, or decision-making. As she continues addressing the courtroom, she highlights how many families arrive in paternity court with emotional confusion, similar to stories in adoption stories, full episodes, where identity is uncovered slowly, painfully, and often unexpectedly. In both scenarios, truth becomes a stabilizing force. A child deserves to know where they come from, and adults must honor that right with transparency and maturity.